What's going on, everybody? I am here to do a review, reaction, if we want to call it that, to the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air 30-year reunion. I have to give a shout out to Versatile Legacy for sending this to me because I do not have HBO Max. So this is so the way I was able to watch it was through him. And this is on HBO Max, their streaming platform for this reunion. Man, I literally just got done watching it. Like, it just ended probably less than a minute ago, and I just turned the camera right on and just wanted to jump right into review. Man, this was very interesting to watch. It was entertaining. It was definitely emotional. You got an insight into the show itself from its beginnings to everywhere in between and all the way to the end, and just got an insight to how the show was ran and how the show was formed, how the success kept on building all the way up into their last day. I usually don't take notes when I do reviews, but one thing that I like is that with something that's on a streaming platform, I'm able to sit there and take notes down so I can put things into, put my thoughts down. That way I don't miss anything, especially with something like this, because I want to make sure I hit on a lot of key points, and there's a lot of them. The actual reunion itself is about an hour and 15 minutes long. That's not a long time at all. And pretty much everyone was there with the exception, of course, of James Avery, but we're going to get to that part. And we're going to talk about a lot of things, including some things that, of course, I know people who are watching this want to hear about for those who haven't watched it yet. So where it all began, September 15th, 1990. And it's crazy to believe because I was born May 4th, 1989. So I was only a year and a few months old when this show came on. So I guess you can say my introduction into sitcom life or watching sitcoms came at a very young age, and it was most likely through that particular show. And that's when Fresh Prince of Bel-Air aired on NBC 30 years ago. It's crazy to believe 30 years. That's a long time when you really put into words 3 decades worth of this show being on. Even though the show only ran for 6 seasons, it's still being heavily talked about to this day. It pretty much starts off in kind of like it starts off at showing almost like the ending of the reunion at the beginning, where they show clips or behind the scenes footage of them filming their last episode for the entire show of its run and everything. And I think one thing that got me when I was watching the behind the scenes stuff was seeing them pack up the living room, because if you remember in the very last episode, they are moving out of Bel-Air. They're moving, and I think they're going to the East Coast, if I'm not mistaken. And there's nothing there in the living room except that carpet. Like, there's no furniture or anything like that. And to see them actually packing the stuff up there, it's like literally like when you're about to move out of your own house or wherever it is that you live, and they're putting things onto a moving van and you're leaving, especially if it's a place that you probably lived in for a long time. And then you're just going on with your life. So I like that realism there of showing like how it is for a family to move on to bigger and better things. And of course, when we're watching it at home, we don't really see it like that because we only have a connection to them as an audience, but they have a connection to each other as, I guess you can say, co-workers that eventually grew into being family that entertained us for 6 seasons. And I think Will said that they shot 150 episodes in total by the time the show ended. That's incredible, especially for a show that had a all-black cast. And that's at that time that was almost pretty much unheard of. So to run that many seasons on a major network, which was NBC at the time, well, it still is NBC, but to have that kind of success is just amazing. The next part that happens is the cast comes out. So you have I want to make sure I get all their names right. Of course, you have Will Smith. You had Daphne Reed, who played the second Aunt Viv. You had Alfonso Ribeiro, who played Carlton. You had Tatiana Ali, who played Ashley. You had Karen Parsons, who played Hillary. You had Joseph Marcel, who played Jeffrey. And you had DJ Jazzy Jeff, or Jeffrey Towns, because I think his name is Jeffrey Towns, who played Jazz, who pretty much all came together. They all hugged each other. They all embraced each other. They just kind of laughed. It was kind of like an introductory to the next hour and 15 minutes that you were about to see. The next part that they show, I guess this would be considered the cringe part of the reunion was showing cast auditions and talking about the auditions. They showed a clip of Alfonso Ribeiro auditioning for Carlton. They showed a clip of Karen auditioning to be Hillary, and then Tatiana gave a brief story how she said when she auditioned, she didn't audition in LA. She actually auditioned in New York. So she was on a whole nother coast from where the show was actually being taped at. And, you know, she said she had to do her audition like that. And then eventually, you know, of course, everybody who auditioned ended up getting the parts that they did. And Daphne Reed also said something too, where she originally was going to audition for Aunt Viv back at the time when Jenna Hubert, who I'm going to, of course, talk about later on, got the part. But she said she didn't want to do it because she said one of the things they told her is that we got this new TV show and starring a rapper, and she was like turned off by that, and she didn't do it. And then she said when the show started to come on, she started to watch it. She kind of like had regrets, like that she didn't audition for at the time. But it's amazing how it came full circle because she ended up being the replacement for Jenna Hubert. They also Jazz, he talked about you know, his character and how his character became so iconic just from being thrown out of the house. So like a lot of the audience look forward to seeing him whenever he came in with those jeans and that particular shirt, because he said that whenever he came on the set and he walked into the scene and the audience saw him, they automatically knew that Jazz was about to get tossed out of the house some way, in some form, you know, fashion. Another thing that I wanted, you know, to mention was Will and like how he got his part, because he said that he didn't really have to do a traditional audition to get the part. You know, with him, he was already in the music industry. I think he had already won a Grammy or two by that time, so people knew who he was, but they only knew him as being a rapper. They didn't know him as being an actor. And one thing that they showed in the scenes that I never noticed until they said it in this reunion is that Will was so good at memory that he would memorize not only his lines, but other people's lines. So they show clips from old episodes where he's actually sitting there mouthing the lines of another actor that he was working opposite of while they were saying their lines. And I'm like, because what they did was they zoomed in on his lips moving, and he literally was mouthing their lines as they were saying it. So he had a very good memory to know not only his lines, which was a lot of dialogue, seeing as he was the lead character, so he was always gonna have the most dialogue, and then memorize other people's lines as well. So that's very interesting. And I think Karen Parsons had talked about that in her portion of it. And she said how they used to annoy her because she could always, you know, say the lines and she could see his lips moving, and sometimes she would even hear him whisper. So like, you know, those mics are sensitive. So that was a very interesting part that they mentioned in right there. Next, I wanted to talk about the relationship that Will Smith and Alfonso had. Like they said that, you know, when they met, they instantly really, you know, they clicked. They were like the best of friends and everything like that. And they said they needed that chemistry in order for it to come out on screen. That's crazy because when you look at the show, they were polar opposites. You had Will Smith, who was from a kid from Philly, who was from the streets, versus Carlton, who was from Bel-Air and lived a very privileged lifestyle his entire life. So they were two different worlds clashing with each other. But they said when they was off screen, they were the best of friends. Like, I think Karen has said that, you know, they would, when they were doing table reads, Will and Carlton used to run around the table and chase each other like they were like these big kids and everything like that. So it's good to know that they had a solid friendship leading into the show. Because, you know, sometimes if you don't have off-screen chemistry, it'll show on screen for sure. Sorry about that. But, yeah. So I thought that was very interesting and very telling, to say the least, when it comes to their relationship. Next, I wanted to talk about, they talked about the different memorable moments for each cast member of the show. And it was a lot of memories to go around, like different like things that happened on the show with each character. I can't really exactly remember every last one of them because it was so many, but I highly employ that you go ahead and watch the reunion, and you'll be able to find out which each memorable, I guess you can say, funny moment was. I think one of them they said was when Carlton, if you remember, it was the one where Will had got, there was the episode where Nia Long's character got introduced to the show as Lisa, and she was trying to teach Will a lesson because he was supposed to be like a womanizer, and these women was trying to get back at him, and he went and he escaped from the cabin, and it was at the end of the episode, and Will had told Carlton that she's still up there, implying that she probably was dead, but she really wasn't. And then Carlton runs around the entire set. He's pulling himself on the floor. As I'm describing it, y'all know exactly what I'm talking about here. And then they said that was one of the few times where Carlton completely broke the fourth wall. In television, there's 4 walls. You have the left wall, the right wall, the back wall, and the fourth wall is the audience. And that was very rare to see in sitcom. And Fresh Prince did that quite a bit, but Carlton, when he did that, they said that was like almost completely improv. Like they didn't expect any of that to happen. Another memorable moment I think they said was with Tatiana Ali with her character Ashley, when she said that on the show she experienced her first kiss. And it was that episode where the boy was asking, can he blow in her ear? And it was after the kiss, and she was saying how when the kiss happened, she could see out of the corner of her eye Will, Alfonso, and Karen behind the camera just making these faces like, oh, it's so cute that she had her first kiss and everything like that. Almost like that big brother, little sister, like seeing something, them experience something like that for the first time, which is realistic because that happens in real families. So that was a memorable moment for her. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the success of the show. Like they were saying how the show was so successful that there wasn't anywhere they could go where nobody wasn't talking about their character. Like Jeffrey Towns, I want to use his real name, was talking about how he had 80-year-old women coming up to him and just calling him Jazz and everything like that. And he was like, he wasn't expecting that because he just didn't feel like he was a big star. You know, when it comes to the shows like that, you would only think that the main star, which was Will Smith, was the only one that was going to get all the notoriety, all the, attention and everything of that nature. But all of the cast had their share of, I guess you can say, celebrity fame when it came to that particular show. But that's a tribute to the showrunners and the writers and the network for pushing the show to be as successful as it was then and even still is to this day. The next part I wanted to talk about, the creative control. This part right here was the most interesting part to me of the entire reunion, when they said that the cast was talking about how the showrunners and the writers allowed them to have creative control of their characters, that they didn't want their characters to be robotic. They didn't want them to be wooden. They wanted them to be genuine and authentic and relatable. Like, they said they would have table reads, and that's when they would, run through the script, and then they would rehearse on the show, or rehearse like a couple of days out of the week, and then tape on Fridays. And they said on the rehearsal days, that's when they allowed the cast members to say this is what they wanted to do, this is what they wanted to do. Of course, within reason, nothing completely like out there and anything like that. But I like that they allowed them to have creative control, because a lot of shows don't allow their actors to do that, and especially on a show where the cast is predominantly black. So they allowed them to do that, which is why the show felt real and it felt authentic. Because sometimes you can look at a show and say, that's not how they would act, or that's not how I would act. Like, that doesn't feel real. That doesn't seem real. I know it's not real. But the fact that the showrunners allowed them to have creative control of their characters and how their characters would be was very interesting. Like, one thing that Karen Parsons mentioned is that, of course, with the Hillary character, she was always considered to be like an airhead or a snob or anything like that. She said the showrunners initially wanted to evolve her character to being this, and these were her words, this strong black woman. And she was like, that's fine and all, but I don't really see it for her character. So she basically was fine with her character being the way that she was. Of course, Hillary did evolve some, but from where she was initially at, because she went from being this snobby person that just only cared about money and cared about Hillary Banks, to being an actual career woman. She was a weather woman. She ended up having her own talk show, but she still had a remnants of Hillary Banks from back then, but she didn't want to completely revamp her into this character that people didn't know, and a character she didn't know, and a character that she probably could not identify and play with, to the point where it came off as fake and phony. So I actually give kudos to her for actually rejecting them wanting to make her character be that, because it's almost like she would tiptoe into feminist category, and that probably would not have worked. Let's see. Here's where the emotional part comes in, and that's when they started talking about James Avery, aka Uncle Phil. Definitely one of the most iconic father figure type characters on television. I mean, you got your John Amos's when, playing James from Good Time. You had Carl Winslow on Family Matters. You can even throw Michael Kyle in there from My Wife and Kids, which I think was probably one of the last times we saw a solid black father on television that we could, relate to or, revere or look up to. Whether you were a child who needed a father figure, or you were a father figure or a father who needed guidance on how to be a father or how to be a better father, or to continue improving on being the father that you already are. That's what what I liked about this show is the relatability. Everything, felt real. And James Avery, when they were talking about him, I'm not even gonna lie, like the tears almost dropped, because the way that they spoke about this man, they held him in very high regard. They said he was like a father to each and every character on that show. When he opened his mouth, he's, just realness came out. And one thing they said is that this guy loved jazz. Like, he would have jazz playing in his room, in his dressing room, before they would, go on to set. That was something that calmed him or eased him. Or even when they were, downtime, he would always listen to jazz. And so they would walk past his room and he would have jazz music playing. So I thought that was also a very interesting thing to see and hear about when it came to his character in this particular role. And, they just spoke so very highly of him. And it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to be there during the taping of this, because unfortunately back in 2013 he passed. And that was a bit of a shocker, because I can't remember what he passed from. I don't know if he was ill or if it was just natural causes. But we could not talk about James Avery and not talk about that infamous scene, or that infamous episode, I should say. To this day, I cannot watch that episode, not because I could relate to it, but because, thank God, I don't, because I had my dad in my life and still do to this day. But it's so many black boys out there who do not have their father in their life, and their dad is still alive. Like, a lot of black boys out there could relate to how Will's character was in that particular episode. In my honest opinion, the Emmys dropped the ball not nominating Will Smith and James Avery for in the acting category for that, but you know how that goes. So I'm not even sweating it. And that episode was just so emotional. And the thing is, like, today watching the reunion was like the first time that I actually saw clips of that episode in there. I can't even look at reaction videos of people reacting to that episode online. It's that deep, because I keep thinking about all the black boys out there who are in that position. And Will was talking about in that episode, he said he kind of messed up his lines and just kind of went completely off script with it, and then was losing his way. And James Avery had to kind of snap him back into the role, because he was losing himself, because it got so emotional for him. And he said, "I want you to look at me. I want you to focus on me when you're saying those lines." He actually had so much power when he said that he actually yelled cut instead of the director, and then told them action, and they rolled the camera again. And he said that the scene that we saw all those years ago, and that's still out, of course, today, is the scene that they ended up going with. And he said when he gave him that embrace and when he hugged him, he said James whispered in his ear, and he said, "Now that's acting." And I would have to agree, that was probably some of the best acting I've seen come out of Will Smith ever. And that's to take away from any other movies that he's ever done. But that right there, in my opinion, solidified him as a dramatic actor. And I truly believe it was from that particular episode, which led and steamrolled him into where he is today as far as movie roles and doing more serious things. Because I always say a lot of comedic actors can be as dramatic as those who have been doing dramatic roles their entire careers. And you'll be surprised how many dramatic actors who can be just as funny as those who have done comedic roles for their entire career, unless they are like drop dead hilarious comedians. But definitely R.I.P. to James Avery, aka Uncle Phil. The reunion did feel kind of empty without his presence there, but his presence, spiritually was definitely felt. The next part I wanted to talk about, and this is the part that I think a lot of people want to hear, is the Janet Hoover part. The original Aunt Viv, who I think only was on the show for 3 seasons. If I'm not mistaken, I think she went from 1990 to 1993. So, of course, we all know Janet Hoover was the original Aunt Viv. And they showed the clip where Will and her and Janet talk to each other one-on-one. Up until today, I never saw that interview, because I think that interview is somewhere online outside of the reunion. I think they just threw that in there. And I think he said the cast had never seen that interview either. Or not interview, but that discussion. So I felt like I was a member of the cast when I saw that. I had never seen it, so this is my first time looking at it. And basically, they poured out as much as they possibly could. One thing I learned was when she was pregnant on the show with the Nicki character, she was actually pregnant in real life. So they wrote her pregnancy into the show. And I think her being pregnant is what led to the downfall of her being on the show. She started to talk about how they had given her a bad deal. She was hearing rumblings, from Will Smith, making fun of her pregnancy and everything like that. Then basically they ended up writing her out of the show, just her as an actress, but not her as a character. So her character of Aunt Viv wasn't going away. The actress playing her was. And she was basically talking about how in her marriage to her former husband, it was an abusive relationship. She had her child. She said she pretty much got blackballed from not only the industry, but she also got blackballed from her family. She said the fallout from what happened with her on the show spiraled into her family not even talking to her. When I heard that, I was like, wow. And the thing is, you never really know what goes on until you actually hear it for yourself. Like, her own family disowned her. So she was left with a child in an abusive marriage, which I'm sure she definitely got out of soon after, with no money, no acting jobs. Like they said, nobody would work with her because they pretty much gave her a reputation of being a B word. I don't want to say it on here, but that's basically what they gave her the reputation as of being after that happened. So, it's very unfortunate, but I'm glad, they said, she said some things. We know she said some things. Will has said some things. And I'm glad that they were able to bury the hatchet, because they said this was the first time they talked to each other in 27 years. Can you imagine someone that you worked with every single day, that you had a seemingly good relationship with, and just one day the line of communication just stops. It just ceased out of nowhere. It just stops. She said they have not seen each other. They haven't talked to each other for 27 years until that reunion. And he brought her back to not only see him so they could, bury that situation once and for all, but also to hear her side of the story out of her own mouth, because we never really heard it. We never really heard her side of the story, and we always heard what the media put out there. But she was able to come back, and she ended up walking into the set, and she was able to talk and meet with the cast for the first time also in 27 years, because they hadn't seen her. And some of them probably haven't talked to her either, because they probably was told some things, and it is what it is. And one interesting thing is, this is the first time ever that you had both Aunt Vivs, Janet Hoover and Daphne Reed, meet each other for the first time. They had never met at all prior to this. When she came in and she replaced her, they never had any conversations. They probably told her not to even talk to her. truth be told. They said don't talk to her, don't try to reach out to her, don't do anything. That woman is toxic. Who knows what they were saying about her? But they embraced each other like they had known each other all their lives. And that was something that was amazing to see, most definitely. So I'm glad that Will and Janet are back on good terms, seemingly. I say seemingly because we don't really know sometimes what goes on behind the scenes. But I'm glad that they seem to be back on speaking terms, because 27 years to not have any kind of contact with each other for whatever reason, especially if it's something petty, is very unfortunate. Especially if this is someone that you worked with early on in your career and someone you built a relationship with and started to build one with, and it just falls apart like that. And that's unfortunate, because you even have some families like that who have been talking to their own family members in that same amount of time. But it's good to see that they have that relationship now, and they can hopefully build on from that, because 27 years is a long time to lose contact. Like, look at all the stuff that you missed out on. That could have, time. I always talk about time. Time, you don't get time back. But hopefully they can repair that now. Let me see what else we got on here. So, when I was looking at the promo for this, they were showing how the cast kind of all looked off to the side and they were all in excitement. And here I am thinking that the person that was going to come through the door as a surprise was going to be Janet. But surprisingly, it wasn't her. And I was like, okay, so who could it be? I said, I can only think of one person, one other character on the show that it could be. And it's exactly who I thought it was. And that was the actor that played Nicki. Now, of course, his character was only around for like the last 2 seasons. He was, of course, the little boy, the last Banks kid. And he was on the show. He's all grown up now. And so it was interesting to see that they actually brought him in to the show, because, even though his part wasn't as big or as major as the others on the show, he definitely played a part, and he definitely had a little movie career before and after the show, because he was Buckwheat in the movie version of The Little Rascals, and he played in Independence Day with Will Smith. So he had a little small short career after it. So it was good to see that they brought him back in. So now I felt like the cast was complete. Well, with the exception of James Avery, but with that situation, there's nothing you can do with that one. So that was interesting that they brought him back. The Friday Night Ritual. This is something that they actually showed on one episode where they were doing like behind the scenes, and I think it was a bloopers episode, and Dick Clark was the guest, and it was actually the second to last episode of the show, of the series, where they would do when they would grab the instruments and like bang on the walls and everything like that, and then have the cast come out and greet the audience. And then they said that the audience being there was like going to a weekly concert. Like, they always made sure that they were, they had them live and everything like that. And they said sometimes that they would have a laugh track, but they said sometimes the audience was so loud that sometimes they didn't even need to use a laugh track, or the laugh track would get drowned out, or if they felt it was loud enough, they would turn the laugh track down. So that's the authenticity of that audience. You could tell there was a live audience. Nowadays, you don't have live audiences like that. They use a laugh track, and you can tell it's a laugh track because all the laughs sound the same. All they'll do is they'll turn it up in volume to make it seem like it sounds different, but it's really the same track all the way spread through. But for shows like Fresh Prince had the real live audience, then they said they would tape on Friday, and the episodes would air that following week. So that was very interesting to hear about how the audience was like, a cast member in and of itself, and how they would go out there and they would interact with them and, make them feel like they're a part of the show. Because they definitely, with no audience, you have no show. Ratings matter when it comes to television. The second to last thing I wanted to talk about on this reunion is the final week of filming. Another emotional part of this reunion, and them talking about the very last table read, the very last taping, the very last rehearsals of this show. And like, that's why I say it comes full circle, because they kind of showed the ending of the reunion at the beginning. And just to see them read those last bit of lines of the show while trying to hold back tears, and some of them just couldn't hold back the tears of, you know, of it falling onto some people like crying right into the script as they were reading it, because it's like, this is it. And I can only imagine what it was like for them to actually tape the last episode without messing up their lines and sounding like they were on the verge of tears when they weren't supposed to be on the series. Like, one thing Will said, and this is kind of early on when they did the last episode, when he was doing the Carlton dance with Carlton, which is something that he never did on the show. He said, I have to do it because it's the last episode. He said he felt like that was the official bonding of Will and Carlton's character. No longer were they separate entities, like they felt like they came together as one. And he said he felt the connection when he did that. And I felt that. I felt that when he said that. One thing Jeffrey Towns, Jazz, said was when he filmed his last scene in the final episode, he wasn't in the very last scene. He had filmed another scene and he wasn't there. And he said that when the director yelled clear, he said he walked off the set, walked back to his dressing room, packed all of his stuff up, went to the airport, and flew back to Philly. He said because it was too emotional for him to be there for the final, I guess you could say, curtain call, because that's what they call it. He said it was too emotional. He could not do it. He said he could not be there to witness that because he said it was too much. And, that's his prerogative. I'm sure they probably hoped that he would be there because he definitely played a part in that show. Like, he was always a comedic relief when he came on screen. But that was his reasoning, and I can't even knock him for it. But I'm sure they wish that he was there. And the reunion pretty much ends off with the cast pretty much he sings the theme song, and then it ends off completely with them turning on that Tom Jones song, and Alfonso Ribeiro and Will Smith doing the Carlton dance. And and then that's pretty much the end of the reunion. All in all, it was very good to watch. Definitely a huge part of my childhood. I think anybody who's watching this who grew up in the 90s, whether they were a child, a minor, or a teenager on the verge of becoming an adult, could definitely relate to this show. And I don't think there's a black family out there who was around at that time that did not watch that show. And it's amazing of the icon status that it has today, and how it has impacted the world. Like, this show has become a worldwide phenomenon in and of itself. And at the time, I'm sure the cast members and the crew did not expect that. But you go into things like that not expecting that. You don't expect things like that to happen. Like I say, when you're doing videos, you don't expect things to go viral. You just put it out there, and whoever sees it, sees it. And you keep on going. And I'm sure that they didn't think that, but I'm sure now that they are glad that it did. Definitely shout out to the creators, the writers, the actors, everybody behind the scenes who put together such an amazing, iconic show in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. To believing in someone like Will Smith, who was just a rapper from Philly, who never acted a day in his life, and to put a solid supporting cast around him that could help him carry this show to where it was. And it pretty much took it into another world in only 6 seasons. That may not seem like a lot, but when you really put a lot of stuff into a show, it's a lot. It really is. Take it from somebody who's been on film sets before. Just doing one episode or one scene is tedious. Imagine doing hundreds of episodes and hundreds of scenes. It's a lot. It's really a lot. And also shout out to the individuals who put this reunion together. It was definitely one of the more positive things that could come out of 2020, considering all the stuff that has happened this year. So it was very good to find, to watch something that was lighthearted, that was genuine, but also emotional at the same time. But this reunion was very good. I would highly suggest that you watch it. I hope that I really didn't spoil anything, but some of you like to watch my reviews anyways, and you'll watch it regardless. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the video right here. Y'all let me know what y'all think down in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you in the next one.